Okay, everybody, here we go again. Welcome to the Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth conversations with today's leading writers. I'm Brad Listi. I'm in Los Angeles. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. Hope you're okay out there, wherever you happen to be. Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Bluesky and Instagram. I'm going to be talking today with Shelby Hinte, author of a debut novel called Howling Women. It is available from Leftover Books. It is a metafictional confessional about violence, female rage, sex, addiction, and the lengths one woman goes to rewrite a history she never consented to. I had a great time meeting Shelby Hinte. I've sort of known of her for a long time. I kind of internet know her. Do you know what I'm saying? She's always on my screen. And she's a good literary citizen. And I'm very happy to have had the chance to meet her and to talk with her about this debut novel of hers. Again, it's called Howling Women. And you'll hear Shelby and I having a conversation in just a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by Penguin Press, publisher of Pan, the debut novel by Michael Clune. Pan tells the story of a strange and brilliant teenager's first panic attacks and how they lead him down the rabbit hole. This is a wild, hotly anticipated debut novel from one of our most distinctive literary minds. Michael Clune is the critically acclaimed author of the memoirs Game Life and Whiteout, The Secret Life of Heroin. Pan is a psychedelic novel and a timeless coming-of-age story. Harper's Bazaar says, quote, with prose as strange as it is hypnotizing, Pan will leave you breathless and wanting for more. This book has been longlisted for the Center for Fiction's 2025 First Novel Prize. Kaveh Akbar in the New York Times Book Review says, quote, Pan is deliciously observed, ferociously strange. Like a great painter, Michael Clune can show us the mind, the world, with just a few well-placed verbs. One more time, the book is called Pan, the debut novel by Michael Clune, available from Penguin Press. A quick reminder before we get going that I have a weekly email newsletter. I would love it if you would subscribe. You can do so free of charge over at bradlisti.substack.com. It's a good way to keep in touch with me and to stay abreast of what's happening here on the podcast. I will let you know on a weekly basis about the latest episodes. And I also share a list of links to things that I have been reading and finding interesting. So it's once a week. It's quick. It's easy. It's hopefully painless. I try to make it useful. If you want to hear from me in your inbox once a week, go sign up for my newsletter over at bradlisti.substack.com. I also want to give a shout out to my new company, Deep Dive, which will be launching very soon. Deep Dive specializes in the creation of educational audio courses, and the debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. I am the host of the course, and it features more than 50 hours of never-before-heard conversations with dozens of today's leading contemporary writers. There's never been a writing course quite like this one. Instructors include Emily St. John Mandel, Steve Almond, Vivi Ganeshananthan, Melissa Broder, Purchista Hakpour, Antoine Wilson, Hannah Petard, Lynn Steger Strong, Stephen Graham Jones, Matthew Salisis, Matt Bell, Madeline Lucas, Deb Olin Unferth. The list goes on. It's really cool, and it's imminent. It's going to be happening soon. The launch is going to be happening soon. If you want to join the waitlist for How to Write a Novel, you can do that at www.deepdive.audio. And of course, I will be keeping you posted here on this program. All right, so my guest once again is Shelby Hinte. Her debut novel is called Howling Women, available now from Leftover Books. Shelby is the associate editor of Write or Die magazine, where she edits essays and interviews. Her work has been featured in Bomb, ZYZZYVA, SmokeLong Quarterly, Hobart, the Rumpus, Electric Literature, and elsewhere. And once again, Howling Women is her debut. So very pleased to catch Shelby at this moment in time as her first book rolls out and makes its way into the world. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Here I am with Shelby Hinte, and her debut novel, once again, is called Howling Women.
I'm sure there's a lot that can be projected on me, but I have never shot a man, so there's a big difference there. But the book originated, I think, mostly with a question. I realized, actually talking to someone else kind of recently, that I'd been writing a couple other versions of it that were really different, and I didn't realize until I was moving and found like old pages. And so it originated, I guess, with a question or an interest in two women who didn't know each other well, by odd circumstances ending up living together, and where they lived and how they met had changed multiple times through different iterations of the book. But one of the things that remained the same was that through them coming together and some of their backstory crossing over, one of the characters discovered the location of a person who had harmed her in her past. And in sort of their belligerent states, decided it was a good idea to like seek a sort of revenge on this person. And so that's kind of been the most consistent through line. And I think that's probably just a subconscious interest. I don't know why I kept writing that story in many different ways, but I think when it became Howling Women, like the book that were the basis of what it is now, I was back in New Mexico, which is where I'm from. And I was working out of this coffee shop that had a direct view of this mountain, and, you know, like a very small mountain, but it was a place that we all used to go and like smoke pot and do drugs at when I was growing up as a teenager. And we had like a mythology around it. And we would always say that the reason crazy things happened in the town we lived in was because of this little mountain. And I think that just kind of took the book like and propelled it forward, took this kind of narrative or this idea I'd been playing with in a lot of different locations, and it gave it a setting and sort of a structure.
So you grew up in New Mexico?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where?
In Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Okay, which features in the novel.
Yes.
And what is Las Cruces like? I don't think I've been there. I've been to New Mexico, but I don't think I've been to Las Cruces unless it's on the way from Denver to Albuquerque. Is it off of I-25?
I don't think it's off of the I-10. And, you know, I haven't been back in a lot of years. The last time I was back was maybe 5 years ago. And before that, it had also been a couple years. So I think it's very different now than when I was growing up. But when I was growing up, it was a very small, relatively like poor town, or at least like the neighborhoods that I was growing up in were a little bit like definitely not affluent neighborhoods. And this is, I think, a good description of the town. When I moved away to college, a friend a couple years later sent me a photograph of the front page of the newspaper, which was featuring a Barnes and Noble that had come to town. And the reason it was on the front page news was because it was the first building in town to have an escalator. And so that can maybe give a sense of the town.
And what kind of kid were you?
I was a kid that was forced to play outside a lot because my mom worked graveyard, and my dad lived in Arizona. And when I lived with him, I also was forced to play outside a lot because he worked graveyard. And so daytime was when they slept. And so I was definitely like in my own head a lot, playing game. I think I grew up way later. As an example, when I was 13 and everybody was like getting boyfriends and girlfriends in middle school, like the biggest problem in my life was that I was like trying to start a secret restaurant in my dad's house when he was asleep, where we would all do like an open mic, and I was the restaurant owner, and just like kind of living in like la make-believe land. And I would call, you know, this new friend of mine at the time and tell him, you know, what I was doing while I was away. And it was very different than what he was doing. And I felt a little maybe immature or a little bit stunted in that way.
Yeah, I feel that. I think, but I'm raising a child right now who's kind of at that age and is maybe less mature. I mean, like the thing is like emotionally very mature, but just in terms of like what she's up to. Like she has friends who are like vaping and going to parties and like having sex with people. Like, she's still a kid. And I'm so grateful. I'm like, thank God.
Yeah.
But I guess people just grow up at different speeds. I don't know what the factors are. Is it something I'm doing? I have no idea, but I think it's okay. And it's interesting to me, just like as an observational thing. I don't know what the factors are precisely, but I think it's very adorable that you were making a magical restaurant in your dad's house at age 13. That feels better than like, going out with some guy who's 4 years older than you. And I don't know. It's like, have a childhood. That's kind of where I'm at, but I'm also a dad.
Yeah. Well, and I think that came in high school. I think by the time I like had a car and had a job, I was very much just getting into a lot of trouble. And so I think there was this like delayed, kind of stunted, I live in this la la land space and I'm, taking photographs of my Beanie Babies. And then suddenly I was like off to the races, just being a total psychopath as a teenager. So I'm not sure what broke, but there's definitely like kind of two very distinct time periods.
Well, maybe when you got your driver's license or something, maybe that, like freedom. Like now I'm a little bit afraid. This is what I have to look forward to.
Yeah.
Like my halcyon days.
Yeah, don't
They're
just
almost over.
relax. Don't believe this is all you get. There's still time for something to break.
So where in Arizona did your dad live? You were in Las Cruces with your mom, and then
he lived in Arizona. He lived in the Phoenix area. So he lived in Mesa. And then I lived with him my first year of high school. And he was living in Gilbert, Arizona, which is just outside of Phoenix. Or it's like in the Phoenix metro.
Yeah, I think I read about Gilbert. Wasn't there like some awful like teenage gang thing? Or I've read something about Gilbert. And maybe it was like in a political season. Like maybe it was demographically representative of maybe like a broader, I forget what it was, but I want to say there was some horrific like teen violence thing that unfolded in Gilbert, which had traditionally been like a safe community. It wasn't like a rough area, but something awful happened there not too long ago, unless I'm totally botching this. But
he doesn't live there anymore, so I don't keep track. But when I was going to high school there, I just went my freshman year, we lived in like a Mormon community. So the high school I went to, like after lunch, basically at least half the high school, probably much more than I don't feel like I trust my memory. At the time, it felt like everybody but me went to seminary. And then we all just stayed in sort of this like hangout room while all the Mormon kids went to seminary post lunch. And then classes would resume after seminary. So it was very it was a strange town. Thinking of it being like really violent does not sound like my experience.
Wait, now seminary, like were you in a public high school or was this some sort of like private Mormon school?
Yeah, it was just the public high school.
How can you have seminary in a public high school? I guess that's now a thing.
Yeah. I don't know the rules and I think I was 15 and I just really didn't care to know why. I think the only thing I could pay attention to at that point was, everyone I go to school with is a freak and I'm not like them.
That's how you felt.
Yeah, I think it's strange to just get dropped in a new town for your freshman year of high school, So I definitely wasn't paying attention to the whys. I think I was a little bit self-absorbed for that.
Hey, do you guys want to come over and play in my magical restaurant after school?
I think I was past that point, but maybe not. I don't remember enough to say one way or the other. But yeah, that wouldn't have been a good way to make friends. Or maybe it would have in that environment. I don't know.
Yeah, these Mormon kids can't have caffeine. You could have served them imaginary coffee and chocolate. I don't know what they're not allowed to have, but I want to say caffeine is a no-no, right?
I think caffeine. I think I remember they had to have a special toothpaste. One of the houses, they couldn't have any sugar. I don't think it was the same for everybody. I think there's a spectrum.
And both of your parents worked a graveyard shift? They both worked nights?
Yeah.
What were they doing?
My dad was a mechanic for the airlines, and my mom is a nurse.
Okay. And working, that's rough, to have to work all night. And both of your parents doing that. I can imagine you had a lot of freedom as a child that I did not have.
Yeah. In high school, when I went, I returned to live with my mom the final 3 years of high school. And her only rule, I think at one point in high school, maybe she didn't work graveyard, but I do remember that the main rule in high school was that as long as I got A's and B's, she wouldn't ask questions. So I was kind of allowed to do whatever I wanted and stay out as late as I wanted, so long as I went to school.
That's fair.
Yeah, I think it allowed me to get into a bit of trouble, but it also made sure that I did well in school.
Yeah. I mean, and I just I don't know. I think there's my theory of parenting, which nobody should subscribe to. I'm not positioning myself as any kind of authority, but I just think maybe less is more.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think parents have a lot less control than they think they do, whether they're being hands off or being hands on. I don't know. The more people I meet and kids I see growing up, the more I realize that you're just going to become who you're going to become. And we all have to go through our own crazy at some point. And so I think that can maybe alleviate some of the pressure.
Did you have any siblings?
I had a younger brother, yeah. Or have a younger brother.
Was he working as a fry cook in the imaginary restaurant?
I don't remember what he was doing. It was an imaginary restaurant, but we did sell real food. And so that's kind of how we got caught, was we sold all of the Costco pizzas to the neighbor kids while my dad was sleeping, which was not something he, felt very fondly about, discovering that all of the food in the house was gone because we'd sold it.
Did you turn a profit?
I'm sure I did. Who knows how much? I don't think I was selling it. It was probably selling for pennies, and I don't know what I would have bought with it at the time. Probably nail polish or something.
Yeah. You could have been like, look, Dad, I'm selling it by the slice. We can turn around and buy even more pizzas. So, okay. And you said you kind of flipped in high school from being this maybe more childlike teenager to getting your driver's license and then kind of going wild. But as long as you got A's and B's, you had some room to roam. I mean, did you get into any real trouble as a kid?
I think yes and no. I mean, I discovered drugs and alcohol in high school, and I, was getting into trouble in that way of making poor choices and doing things I was embarrassed about. But I did, I totaled my car in a drunk driving accident when I was 17. And it was a pretty bad accident. I had to be pulled out through the window because I was on my way to buy a pack of cigarettes on the side of town that didn't card me. So that kind of trouble. Yes.
That's real trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good one. And there's a lot of drinking in your novel. I'm not even really much of a drinker, but I wanted a drink many times while reading this book. Everyone's doing shots and having beers, and it's in this tavern and just lots of alcohol. And that kind of squares with my childhood too. You're significantly younger than I am, I believe, but I just feel like maybe when I was coming of age, drinking was more of a thing. I guess it depends on where you are, but it sounds like where you were from, everybody was getting drunk and smoking weed on this mountain.
I mean, yeah, that's all you did was find places by the river in nature where there were no adults and you could do whatever you wanted, which was normally just doing drugs.
And did you get injured in this car accident that you were in?
No, whiplash, of course, but nothing major. I was completely lucky that was all that happened.
And did you get into legal trouble for the DUI? They must have figured out that you were drunk.
No, and this is a story that still feels really fake to me, honestly. I'm in disbelief when I remember it, but I did have to take a DUI, roadside test. And we were out in Doñana County. So it was the sheriffs, not the cops, who had come to the scene. And I'd been drinking all day. And I have no idea how I didn't get a DUI other than, I don't know, I'm white and was young and who knows what I said. And I had that kind of privilege. But what I do remember is that there was this sheriff's deputy in training who I remember the sheriff asking, do you feel like you're ready to do a DUI check? And so I don't know if it was his first time checking someone or not, but I passed. They didn't breathalyze me. I think I just had to walk in a straight line and do my fingers to my nose and out extend the side of my body. And so that's really a just total shock to me. And they did the DUI check because they said I smelled like alcohol, which of course I'd been drinking all day. So of course I smelled like alcohol. So that's just like a total mystery in my life still to this day.
I think it was the vortex. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah,
I feel like maybe that mountain, was there talk, because your novel also, like we should give people maybe like an overview. I'll take a stab at it and then you can add or subtract to what I say. But this is a story about a woman who is in flight from two relationships. I think she's married and then was having an affair. And then she decides she's going to kind of blow it all up and take off. And she goes back home to New Mexico to see her mom, and then doesn't stay there long and ends up in the town of U, which is in Arizona or New Mexico?
It's in New Mexico. I mean, it's made up, but it's a made up town in New Mexico.
Okay. And like, then she kind of falls into this life in U. I mean, she's got like basically no resources. She ends up there. There's a bar called the Whiptail, which is fun. It was fun for me as a reader to kind of imagine this place, like in this like one horse town in the middle of the desert. And it's like this dive bar with all of these kind of cool people. And it's got a kind of a towny crowd that tends to be there. And she ends up living with this woman who like performs at the bar and goes by the name Howling Woman. That's like what she calls herself. And Howling Woman takes Sabine.
Mm-hmm.
She takes Sabine, who is the protagonist of this book. She kind of takes her in and they become roommates. And like what I will say, and your book also references, I think, some of its influences. It kind of calls them out. But this is like a female redemption narrative. At one point, you name check Cheryl Strayed's Wild, or the narrator name checks it. It's definitely not Wild, but it's like referencing, I think, that book because it is so emblematic of a kind of narrative of like female empowerment and redemption. And the book also at one point references Thelma and Louise, which, you know, has kind of a similar milieu, like a desert setting. And it's about women who are on the run and have kind of avenged themselves against an abuser. And then the other thing that I kept thinking, and that might not be the full list of, name checks or references in the book, but those are just a couple of prominent ones. And then the other thing that I kept thinking about was like desert noir. I love desert noir. Like I was thinking of the movie, it's with Kurt Russell. Oh God, I'm totally blanking, where his wife gets kidnapped. He's like driving through like the Utah desert and his wife gets kidnapped by these guys, like JT Walsh, I think is the actor. Anyway, it all takes place in the middle of nowhere, which is kind of a terrifying place to be. There's something terrifying about these towns. And I felt that in your book. And I'm wondering if you felt it. Like, was that something that was intentional, and were you drawing on like desert noir as an influence?
Yeah, I don't know if I was explicitly drawing on desert noir, but I think I love films that have kind of this aesthetic that you're describing. And I really wanted that in book form, of that sort of oppressive heat and the way the desert can make people crazy, and just these strange places that seem as though they belong in a different time than maybe the time that everybody else is experiencing in the rest of the country. And I just find that to be a really interesting space, both literally to visit places like that, but to see it in film. And then I think as a writer, like getting to play make-believe in that space, I think it provides a lot of opportunity for exploration.
Breakdown is the name of the Kurt Russell movie. It just occurred to me.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
It's superb. I think you would like it. And it's kind of like a cult classic. But I think, too, these locations and the setting of your book, this fictional town of U, New Mexico, makes you think to yourself, like, how does somebody wind up here? And probably like one common possibility, I think, would be that they're on the run from something, like, or I guess you're just from there. It's almost like one of the two. Either that's where you're from and you never got out, or shit didn't work out wherever you used to be, and now you're kind of in the middle of nowhere in this town. Is that your feeling?
100%. I think that is like the space that I was most curious about. And even growing up, the town that I live in, which I think this is very untrue now, but I just remember hearing a lot of stories of people who ended up there, and they would share stories like, oh, I never heard of this town. And then my car broke down and I just never left. And I just thought that was like that I'd heard that story multiple times was so wild to me. And still to this day, I've never lived in another place where people say something like that. You know, my car just broke down, or I stopped for gas here and never left. I think that's such a strange way. And I'm sure they were being hyperbolic, the people who told me these stories when I was growing up, but it doesn't change the fact that that's like the narrative they've created for themselves of how they ended up there. There are many towns in the desert that I visited that feel like exactly what you're describing. And my experience is pretty similar every time I end up in one of these places. And one that really stands out to me is Bisbee, Arizona. Have you ever been there?
No, but that's where the comedian Doug Stanhope like has his like compound, and that's how I know about Bisbee. And so I want to say like I read about him or was watching some video or both or something of, you know, him on Instagram. And I got curious and like went down an internet rabbit hole about Bisbee once. And it's like this old mining town, right?
Yeah. And it's like in a canyon. And I just remember going to a bar there once, and there's like all these signs in the bar that say, keep your gun out of the bar and no more than 2 shots. And I just thought that was so strange. Like I felt like I'd walked into another planet that was so, and you know, at this point I was living in California. I think I was still living in Oakland. And so I roll into this town that really is just one main street, you know, it's kind of just like a messed up road. And I thought it was the coolest place I'd ever been, but it didn't have any of this normal things that like I'd be used to, like grocery stores or Wi-Fi or like a good cell reception. And I think that that's very much a choice to go and live in a place where you're like intentionally limiting your resources. Like if you didn't just grow up there, right? If you made the choice to go and live in a place in which your resources are limited, and it puts you at it makes you incapable of living in the same way that maybe the majority of people in the country are living. I think it says something about the kind of person you must be or the kind of lifestyle you want to lead.
Yeah, I just think some people want to live off the grid, or they want to kind of live outside as much as they possibly can, like physically. And then I also think like ideologically outside the confines of like typical American existence. There's something about Bisbee, and again, I haven't been there, so correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, like I remember looking at it and being like, this is like the Old West. It's like some combination of like, I think Wyatt Earp might show up here any moment. And I also think like I might get abducted by aliens. It's like that thing.
Yeah. And then also add like a bunch of Burning Man people. I feel like that's the vibe of Bisbee, is like this weird burner culture meets the Wild Wild West meets something surreal is happening here. Maybe
I should live there. I could probably fit in.
That was my first thought when I moved there, because I'm always envisioning going off the grid. Every time I go to a place that's a little bit more remote, I think this is it for me. This is where I want to be. But I've so far not made that leap.
Well, you went from Oakland to Santa Rosa, right? So like, let's kind of keep tracing this. You're in high school. You somehow magically avoided getting a DUI, even though you totaled your car while hammered and searching for a pack of cigarettes. And then you were getting A's and B's. You had like maybe more freedom than the typical kid because your parents were working the night shift. And then what happens? Like clearly you got out of there. Did you go to California for college?
Yeah, I moved pretty much right after I turned 18. And it was kind of 2 options. I was going to move to Albuquerque. I'd gotten a full ride to like, you know, just the state university there. And I was like obsessed with this boy. And I had this like fantasy of like, oh, we'll go and be in love together. He was older than me and already living there. And I would go and visit him on the weekends. And that was obviously like not working out. And so I'd also gotten into art school in California. And I just decided that was probably a better option. And so I packed up the car, and my mom drove me to Arizona, and we picked up my dad, and then they took me the rest of the way to California and dropped me off.
Where at what art school in California?
I went to California College of the Arts, which used to have a campus in Oakland, which is where I lived for a long time, but now I think is just in San Francisco.
And so what did you study in art school?
I went with the intention of studying creative writing and or film, and then I ended up just studying creative writing. I think I went to school thinking I'd be a poet, and then sometime in school decided I wanted to write fiction. But, I was doing like a lot of drugs and drinking really heavily most of undergrad. And so as serious as I thought I was, I don't think that I was able to actually sustain any kind of creative production because of just like how I was destroying my brain. And so I finished school surprisingly somehow and did well enough, but I took some time off. And then when I got like clean and sober, then I went to grad school. But I needed a little bit of time, I think, even though I thought I did always want to be a writer. That's something I think I've known since I was pretty young. But in undergrad, I think I believed I was serious about writing, but it was just total chaos, the actual act of writing.
So you got clean and sober.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you just talk about stopping? Like what precipitated stopping? Were there any other DUIs or near DUIs, or was there something that happened where you just said, I've had enough, or was it more kind of gradual? And
I think a little bit of both. I didn't have a car, but I'd wrecked my bicycle many times. And I quit using drugs first. And that was, over a decade ago. And that I think came because I was getting into a lot of trouble and I was in a relationship with someone who was also struggling from the same issues I was. And so it was sort of the only way this is going to work is if we stop using drugs. And then it took some more years before, I was bartending all through undergrad, all through grad school. Like the whole time I was a high school teacher, I was bartending. So it took a while to quit drinking. And I think part of it, I was drinking still when I was in grad school. And I think there's a lot that happened. I was incredibly depressed and I was looking at my life and I was like, I'm a high school teacher. I have this great family. And every day I'm driving over the bridge on my way home from teaching. And I'm thinking about driving off the bridge. How can I feel this way? I feel like I have all the things that are supposed to make a person happy and I'm just miserable. And, I was drinking in my car as I was thinking these things. And at some point, I think it took a while to put it all together that drinking was a big part of those feelings I was having. But honestly, trying to write a book, this is sort of embarrassing in a way, but is part of what helped me realize I needed to quit drinking because I had this draft of a novel, which was Howling Women. And I just would, try to go downstairs and work on it. And I always had to be drinking to do that. And I felt like my brain just wasn't working. I just couldn't do it. And it was really difficult to want so desperately to access this creative space in my brain that I used to believe drugs and alcohol helped me to access. And now were completely shutting me off from that side of my creative existence. And so that was actually a big part of what led me to eventually get fully sober. But, there was a lot more to it. But I do think that in regards to being a writer and being an artist, and part of what helped me with that was actually realizing that there were other writers and artists who were clean and sober, because I always thought if you were clean and sober, you must be a total square and work in an office and you're certainly not making art and, doing anything like that. I think I was really living in a mindset of stereotypes.
Did you just quit? Did you cold turkey it, or did you have to go through some kind of rehab?
I went through an outpatient, but so I had medical help, of course, when I was coming off. And then I I work a 12-step program. And so I had, I think, lots and lots of support getting to a state of being able to stay sober. Because I had done the thing that I think a lot of people do, or a lot of people in similar positions to me do when they're trying to get sober, where I was like, I'd go on a cleanse and, I eat really healthy and like I'm a vegetarian and I don't eat dairy. And so I'll just like also not drink caffeine and not drink alcohol, but I could just never like put very many days together, And so even when I was trying all of these things, and that I think also pointed out like this is a problem, like a normal person like doesn't have to try so hard to put a couple days of not drinking together.
Totally. And I'm wondering, like, as you kind of did start to put days together and you started to get actual help and go through the 12 steps and all that kind of stuff, like, how did it change your relationship to your creative work as a writer? And then also like this blue mood that you had been in and this kind of suicidality that had been haunting you, that stuff obviously started to shift as well, right?
Yeah, eventually I did need antidepressants. I tried really hard to like be vegan and run tons of miles and like find God and therefore find peace of mind. But I do need chemical help in order to not have suicidal ideation, it turns out. But it did get incredibly better by removing alcohol from my system. So the mood thing, like that took some years after getting sober to realize, okay, I've done all the things and there's maybe I need to ask for more help because I'm working so hard to feel better and I do feel better, but I don't think I found out that like, you don't have to spend every day thinking about death to the level that maybe I was thinking about death. But in terms of writing, I think it was the best thing for my writing. I think the way I think about writing is that it is an altered state, especially if you're writing anything, but definitely fiction. And so I think that was one of the reasons like I turned to drugs and alcohol, was to tap into that altered state that I think one needs to be in to create fictional worlds. But it was never sustainable, right? Like the window of time that I could be creative in that like chemically induced altered state was getting smaller and smaller to then non-existent. And I think now it's a little bit trickier to enter that feeling of being in an altered state writing. But I feel like once I'm there, it's so much more sustainable and I can stay there for a really long time and work on the writing. And so that is, I think, a huge payoff. And it's something I try and remind myself of, okay, if I haven't like entered this sort of flow state today or this week, I know that if I just keep showing up, that I think of Haruki Murakami refers to it as mesmerizing yourself into writing. And I kind of think of routine as doing that. If I just keep doing the same thing over and over again, eventually I will be transported to this altered state and hopefully get to exist there for as long as I'm granted.
So when you started to get sober, you said you had a draft of Howling Women on paper, right? Was it a complete draft?
Yeah, it was a mostly complete draft.
Was it a mess? Like what? What kind of state was it in? I guess because you were writing while you were still using, and then you get sober, and you go into the process of refining it. I would imagine. Like, what was the work like?
I mean, it was years more of work after that. And to say whether it was a mess or not, I don't really remember. But it was twice as long as it is now. There were so many more moving parts. And, I just think too, I was younger. I feel like every time now I kind of have this feeling of it's like you try and finish the work as fast as possible because like every time you return to do a new draft, like you just feel so different about it. And so I think the weirdest thing was there were actually a lot of really bad drafts that came through rewriting and revising it in early sobriety, because I think I made it more of like a recovery novel at one point. And like Sabine has more similar experiences to what I have. And I think that was not working and it was not interesting. And so eventually it got to maybe a place where I was able to say she's entitled to have all of her own problems in the book. And I don't have to like save her or give her recovery. Like she can just be on this like highway towards oblivion. So yeah, I think it was a mess, and I don't know how much of that was related to like, my mental state or like where I was at with drinking, but I do think that it took some time after. It took many, many drafts to get it to not be what it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. That just sounds normal on some level to me, just for any novelist. And, how much of that you can attribute to using is probably impossible to measure, but it's definitely true. I would imagine you would say it's definitely true that the clarity you get in sobriety ultimately helped you get it done.
100%, yeah.
And like you said, Sabine, you kind of tried to give her recovery in a discarded draft. I definitely would not call Howling Women a recovery novel. There's no sobriety happening here. Like, it's interesting. I mean, I guess you're writing from experience. You know what it's like to be in a dark bar and to day drink and to drink kind of every day. That's sort of what these characters are up to. Everybody's drinking. I don't know if anybody's super sloppy. Trying to think. I mean, I guess she gets a little hammered, but everybody's really good at drinking, I feel like, in this book. They're sort of professionals.
Yeah.
But, it's definitely not a sobriety book. And it's also a book about a woman who's grappling with the like long-term effects of like childhood sexual abuse. And that is definitely at the core of the book. And it's a big part of Sabine's narrative and like what's happening here. And this is also kind of like a revenge narrative. So I think those are the two big threads for me. It's like desert noir plus revenge, or no, three big narratives: desert noir plus revenge story plus like a story of like female friendship and just like womanhood, like trying to come into one's own as a woman or trying to like forge your own path. And I guess like outrun the past and then maybe eventually realize that can't be done. And so you have to reckon with it.
You should help writers write their query letters.
This is the kind of thing I could never do for my own work. And if you ask me to do it, I would probably screw it up. But like, it's the kind of thing that I think if I'm just talking and like riffing off the top of my head. And I also just finished the book this morning, which is a huge factor because my memory is like a sieve. Mm-hmm. Like, talk to me in 2 weeks and I'd be like, I have no idea what that was. I remember there was a bar. So when it comes to Howling Women and getting it into its present form, it was a number of years that you spent working on this thing. I don't even know how many. Was it a decade?
It was maybe like 7 years. Yeah, about 7 years.
So can you just talk about the finishing process and like maybe what changed in the book, or were there certain things that you did or certain things that you removed that really made it click into place?
Yeah, I think the biggest change came when I decided to write it as, so originally she was never awaiting trial, which is sort of the structure of the book now, is that you have Sabine, like, that she shot someone from the very first page. And so she's awaiting trial, and the book is serving as like this type of confession she's writing. And I feel like when I made that decision, everything else sort of fell into pieces or into place, because previously I had had all these flashbacks that I just felt took up just like a lot of space and slowed down the pacing. And so I realized that if I had this like sort of present running action of she is awaiting, like facing her fate, then I could tie in these flashbacks in a way that was maybe more alive in what was presently happening for her. So that was kind of the big change for the last maybe 2 or 3 drafts, was working with that structural shift.
That reminded me, I forgot to mention this, but your book reminded me in that respect of The Stranger, the Albert Camus novel, which is narrated by somebody in a somewhat similar predicament, but it's kind of a confessional and a recollection, and it's like a guy awaiting his fate. Was that something that was on your mind? Like, was that an influence?
Well, I read that more than once. I read it in high school and in college. And so I don't know if directly it was an influence, but I guess everything that you read in some way is like stuck in your brain and you're thinking about it. So I'm sure it was there somewhere, but no, it wasn't a direct influence. I think it's a generous comparison.
So this is another aspect of Howling Women that I picked up on, and it has to do with Sabine's relationship to her own traumatic past and the abuse she suffered as a child, and the way that she's kind of trying to outrun that abuse and that trauma, and is finding herself in the pages of this novel kind of hitting the wall. Right. She kind of blows up her marriage. There's infidelity. She walks out on her husband. She ends up in this small town in the middle of nowhere. And it's a reckoning. And something that she says, I think more than once in the novel, is that she doesn't like the word victim. She doesn't like the word trauma. These terms drive her crazy, and she finds them problematic. And I found myself wondering what your relationship to these words are, and to, I think, maybe in a larger literary sense, to the pervasiveness of trauma narratives and the way that people kind of present stories of past trauma on social media, for example, or in literature. It's a very common thing. I think it's a natural thing too for people to try to process this stuff in art. But do you have problems with the terminology and with the pervasiveness of it all?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a trait of mine that I projected onto her. I just have a lot of uncomfortable feelings with those two terms and the connotations that get applied to them. And particularly in what you're saying, in like as a plot device or as a narrative arc, and similar, like a recovery arc, right? Like there is this trajectory that they're supposed to take, or that we imagine they take. And I also think that there's this assumption of causality, that like trauma equals this, being a victim looks like this, and that redemption, if there is any, should look a particular way. And I think for me, the big question really writing the novel, or a big question, was just how, like, these plots and narratives and tropes, they exist for a reason, right? Like that is partially a truth to the experience, but I think that they are also truly messy, and being able to connect an experience to a behavior is not something that's very easy to do. And I think we really love a clean narrative and a clean connection, and that's why we keep repeating those narratives. But for me, I wanted to play around with like the mess of it all, which just feels more truthful. It's just like, it is really hard to know, what happens when a bad thing has happened to you, like how much of that is implanted on you and shapes the way you move through the world. Obviously it's not nothing, but is it like, does it have to be your whole identity? And so I think she's going back and forth with like, one, accepting that it has shaped her, and two, resisting the urge to let it be like her singular identifying characteristic.
Yeah. I mean, is this something you've struggled with or had faced as a child? Did you have abuse in your past?
I did grow up with some violence, and, I don't know very many women who haven't experienced some form of abuse, myself included. And yeah, I think that is definitely something myself and many of the women in my circle talk about, is like, what does it mean to carry this? And so many movies and books, the way they depict it just feels so inaccurate, or like, I can't think of another word other than just like cringy, right? Like there's these scenes of like getting to finally kill the abuser, like he's finally sentenced to prison, and you get this like justice, and justice is so like black and white, and even like what we imagine will feel like justice is so black and white. And I don't think that justice is that simple either. And so it is something I've felt really uncomfortable with, trying to figure out how to make peace with or make sense of it without it looking like the way I've seen it in, tons of film and television and books.
Yeah, it is. Like there's like demands, like I guess implied demands that seem to be placed on storytellers, and when it comes to these kinds of stories, because you can feel this pressure to kind of wrap it up, or to create some kind of redemption arc for your protagonist, where they figure it out, or they fix things, or it's all better, or it's like markedly better. And that's my experience too. And like when we talk about trauma, and maybe this speaks to some of the discomfort that you have with the word and with these kinds of narratives, it's like worth saying, like, if you live long enough, you're going to be traumatized. Life is traumatic. It's going to happen to everybody. And I think that if you're a reflective person and you're of a certain age and, you know, life has kind of done its number on you, it does probably occur to you that in some fundamental way, you're shaped by, say, significant loss or some kind of health issue or some kind of rupture with a family member or some kind of sexual abuse or whatever form the trauma takes. And it is worth asking, like, well, to what degree do these things really shape who I am? And how am I supposed to carry this? And what am I supposed to do with it? And I, you know, in my own experience, I think it's worth pointing out that, like, sometimes it is really foregrounded and present, and it sort of dominates me, like some feeling of grief or existential angst or whatever. But then there's like lots of times, maybe even in the same day, there could be hours where it's not there at all. And so that kind of squares, I think, with what you're saying, where this stuff is really variable and it's not neat and tidy. And, you know, I guess, like, how do I put it? It's like learning to carry fire. It's something you just learn how to carry. It's not something you kind of ever can wash your hands of if it's like a big, significant, painful, like emotionally, psychologically, spiritually difficult event.
Yeah. And I love what you said about, like, we all are traumatized, right? I think there's this in like 12 steps, we use the phrase like terminally unique, which is like imagining that like you are the only one who's experienced this thing. And I feel like I definitely had that feeling when I was younger, right? Like these things happen to me, and like this like provides an excuse for like shitty behavior. It makes me so different. And I think just like getting older and maybe just like working through some of that, you really do realize that like everybody is traumatized, you know? And I think that part of the narratives that we see depicted in media and films and television are often like the trauma is the character's like characteristic. It is their identity. And that for me, I think one, it like perpetuates this idea of like, I am my trauma. And I don't think it's wrong or like incorrect that like, yes, we carry it and it's always there, but it's also not unique to being a human. And so I think that's maybe, and there's not just some tie, I think that like healing from it, right? Like I think one expectation that gets put on artists is like that they have their redemption also has to include like a change, like a psychological shift or a spiritual shift in our characters. And I just don't think that's always true. I think that people take a really long time to change. And so I think trying to play around with that of what if someone has, you know, this redemption that's supposed to bring healing and they're still just like kind of shitty.
Yeah. Can you heal? Like that's I mean, I guess on some level you can, but it's never as clean and easy as it is in the movies, right? I mean, I just think you get, like I say, I think you get better at learning how to carry it. Maybe you're a little bit more graceful and patient with yourself when it comes to that sort of thing, but you'll still have some bad days. That's life. That's as far as I've gotten with it. I don't know if you have, maybe you're further down the path than I am, but what do you think about this issue of healing? And then also, I guess, on a related note, like writing this book, you know, there's some kind of confrontational process that I think you're going through creatively, looking at your own past and relationship to substance is in there. This trauma that we're discussing is in there. Was there anything like redemptive or healing about writing this book? Do you feel a little bit lighter having done it or no?
I mean, I definitely feel like, I think the act of just being able to say a thing, to put into words a story that in real life is like this idea of healing, right? Like in real life, everything's kind of unnameable and always shifting. And it's like completely out of our control. It's just total chaos all the time. And once you think you're better, then something else happens and like brings it right back up. And I think the joy of writing a book is that you get to put something in a container, and like push things that are maybe connected to you or not connected to you, or just are like the seeds of a feeling you've had or an experience you've had, but you've like blown it up. And getting to push it to its edge. I think it is, for me, it feels, I don't know if like healing or cathartic, but it definitely feels exciting to be able to work through some of these like big emotional questions I have without necessarily having to live them, right? Like I can make a character shoot a man and like blow up her marriage and like be facing prison time based on her choices without actually having to do that myself. And I can like sort of play through the like fantasies or imaginations that I've had in relation to anything, right? And just see what happens if I push it a little bit further and a little bit further. And I don't know if that's healing, but it definitely is a good feeling to be able to do that.
And what about these vortices? Like whenever I think of the energy vortexes, I think of Sedona. That's the first place I think I ever heard of them, because there's supposed to be like multiple vortices in Sedona. Like, what is a vortex? Were there vortices in this like little like pot smoking mountain that you grew up next to? How does this factor into the book?
So I love Sedona. I've definitely hugged a rock that was said to have a vortex in its center there multiple times. And, you know, the idea of a vortex is something that was definitely talked about in this mountain where I grew up. I don't know if it's true at all that that is a thing, but I think it's a strange belief to, maybe not so strange, but I think it is interesting when so many people in a place believe that like the nature around them has like a magical element capable of changing people. And I feel like when I started writing this book, I was sort of poking fun at those people. And I was just like, this is crazy. Like you go to this
is like some desert shit that people talk about.
Like, it's just totally nuts. Like, how could you ever believe this? And I think the more I was writing the book and the more I was just like having personal experiences and also taking trips to the desert, it like started really to not feel that crazy to me. Actually, it actually felt the opposite, that it is crazy to believe that nature isn't that powerful. And so I sort of had like this huge psychological shift while writing the book, because what started out as like kind of making fun of, you know, a thing that is very much a part of desert culture actually made me a lot more understanding and like compassion of people who have these sort of spiritual or mystical beliefs about how the universe works.
Yeah, I'm ready to believe in a vortex.
I'm ready to believe in anything. If it's going to save me, I'm giving myself to it, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think I read something like that. Some guy was like talking about how the plants are really in charge. And I'm like, okay, I bet they are.
Yeah.
They go down to the Amazon or whatever. And, you know, there is, I think, like a deeper intelligence. You like talk about, or you read about how trees communicate with one another through their root systems. And then I watched some documentary on mushrooms, and I was like, oh my God, there's a lot more happening below the surface than I think we see. And so that spoke to me. But I guess, like, have you ever been fundamentally changed by a vortex? Is it TBD?
TBD. I'm always hoping some great experience in nature will just give me a huge spiritual and psychological shift. And it's yet to happen. I've had shifts, but not anything that's been fully transcendent.
Cinematic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that too. You know, I'll let you know if it happens.
Same.
But I always like to wrap up by asking my guests if they're working on anything new. And, you know, it's fine if you're not, but is there another book in the pipeline?
Yeah, I'm on the fourth rewrite of my next novel, and I'm hoping it's the last rewrite before like cleaning it up and trying to send it out into the world. So I'm not I was further on it, and then I had this big life change and moved, and I'm just kind of getting settled after a big move. And so I've restarted the process of rewriting it. And I feel like in just the last couple of weeks, I've finally found that good place of when I sit down to write, I get lost in it, and it's hard to close my laptop and get ready to go to work. But yep, that's where it's at now.
Does it have a name?
It does. Yeah. It's the working title is Modern Marriage, Love, and Other Drugs.
And it's a novel.
Mm-hmm.
And like broad strokes, it's about modern marriage, love, and other drugs. Like, what's it about?
Yeah. It is about, it begins with an accident in a town where a teenage boy is rendered comatose from a drunk driving accident that a parent of the town runs into him and puts him in the hospital. And it's sort of looking at this blended family, one of whom is responsible for putting this boy in the hospital, and kind of under the light of this community like catastrophe, all of the edges of this blended family where it's like it's kind of just barely functioning and they've maybe had some delusions of how well it's functioning are kind of pushed to their edges, including, one of the parents is going through a relapse, and one of the parents is like a struggling artist. And so they're kind of going through these like somewhat midlife crises of trying to come of age while also raising children. And now this huge event has happened where the peer of their daughter is in the hospital and one of them is responsible.
Wow. Okay. That's a much more substantive answer than I was expecting.
Me too.
Okay, so wait, I lied. Last question, since your book is set in the middle of nowhere in the desert and you're from New Mexico and you're into vortices and like nature and energy and stuff, have you ever seen a UFO?
I've not, but I'm still waiting. And I know many people, including a best friend from high school's dad, who swears to have seen a UFO. So I know many people who have said they've seen UFOs from my childhood, but I personally have not.
Neither have I. I'm dying to see one.
Same. I'm dying for them to take me.
Yeah, please. I'll roll the dice at this point, see what else is out there. But I feel like before we part company, we should acknowledge that we share the same birthday, which we discovered before we started recording, August 1st. We're recording this just a day or two before, so happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
And thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you. I really appreciate you.
Okay, there we go. That was Shelby Hinte talking with me about her debut novel, Howling Women. It's available now from Leftover Books. Great time meeting Shelby. She was delightful, wasn't she? You can find out more about her and her work at shelbyhinte.com. Follow her on Instagram and Bluesky. Once again, her debut novel is called Howling Women. It's out there right now, waiting for you. Get your copy immediately. Don't forget to subscribe to this program wherever you listen. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. You can also follow me on Bluesky and Instagram. Join my newsletter. Sign up for my newsletter over at bradlisti.substack.com. And if you like this program, if you're a regular listener, please support the show over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. You can do so for a pittance, and it would really be appreciated. I put a lot of work into this show. Support the show. It's a good thing to do. If you want to get an Other People t-shirt or a sweatshirt, or if you want to join my book club, you can do all of those things at otherppl.com. That is the show's official website. Once again, it's otherppl.com. And Deep Dive, my new company, which will be launching soon, is it's imminent. It's like a long time in the making, and it's almost here. If you want to join the waitlist for How to Write a Novel, the debut course from Deep Dive, you can join the waitlist at www.deepdive.audio, and you can follow Deep Dive on Instagram and Bluesky. Finally, if you have 2 minutes and you want to do me a favor, please give this show a rating wherever you listen. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Rate it, write a little review if that's an option. It helps the show find new listeners. All right, so coming up on Thursday, I should be back once again with my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for a brand new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, this podcast's weekly pop culture assessment. It's a hangout show, it's irreverent, it's loose, it's meant to be light, it's meant to give you a break from reality and the apocalypse and fascism and ecological collapse. You know what I'm talking about. It's just me and Mira talking about popular culture. Mira is a millennial, and I'm old. I'm 50 years old now, and she teaches me about pop culture, and we basically just talk shit and try to have a laugh. So if that sounds good, check it out on Thursday, Brad and Mira for